Welcome to the special week of our Man Up podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Union Media Group and RMG Productions. So today we're dealing with the topic of the need for communion among us and the lack of communication, the lack of interpersonal relationship among men is a major problem. So much so that self-help groups, books, videos, conferences, seminars have been built around it and have really just been the cause of rather than the solution to. Because you see, friends, the thing is, the way that these people go about tackling the issue is, let's just be honest, it's the same old tried and true method. Gather a whole bunch of men into a room and see what happens. We've had groups that have come together. We've had men conferences. We've had different ways of seeking to get to the heart of why don't men communicate and bond like women do. But in reality, here's the thing. As you'll hear a little bit later from Dr. Martin Phillips Hing, these things have been inbred in us. And so as men, we tend to shy away from disclosing our feelings, from even admitting that we are emotional wrecks. But it has become of late really my understanding of how severe the problem is. Just look up Men and Communicating. The majority of references I got was about their response to women and how women are this and women are that, and that's how they choose to communicate their feelings, by stigmatizing and demeaning women. That being said, Hollywood has done a bang-up job on fueling the crisis, and it is a crisis, brothers, it is a crisis. In fact, shows like Our Gang with their He-Man Women Haters Club, Mad with Children and Home Improvement with their grunts and groans and the need for macho man, as it were, yet unable to very well articulate their feelings, their emotions. And therefore, even as it's supposed to be, I don't want to say that someone there wasn't trying to make a difference, trying to make an impact, trying to make a social statement. But even with these shows, we see the same principles coming out. Gather a bunch of men in a room, grunt and groan, and problem solved. Well, for the next few minutes, I'll let Dr. Martin, in his own words, explain why we don't attend therapy or why we don't feel the need to disclose our emotions, or at least outside of a certain activity, which you'll hear. Dr. Martin.
Of course, it's not completely true that men don't attend therapy. However, women are more likely to attend therapy in greater numbers. According to Statistics Canada, there are also differences in the types of mental health disorders and addictions reported by men and women. Approximately 6% of women and 4% of men experience a mood disorder during the past year. On the other hand, about 4% of men and 2% of women had a problem related to substance dependence in the same period. Many women complain that their husbands or boyfriends don't communicate how they're feeling. When they ask their partner, "How are you feeling?" the response is something like, "I'm fine," or "I don't know." The general belief appears to be that women talk more about their emotions and enjoy watching chick flicks or soap operas that allow them to relate to the protagonist or vicariously experience the character's feelings. However, I would suggest that most men watch soap operas too, except they call it sports. Think about when you most often publicly see men expressing strong emotions such as joy. He shoots, he scores. Fear, 35 seconds left in the game and the home team's barely holding on to the lead. Oh no, he just took a penalty. Disappointment or sadness. That's it, folks, it's all over. They just couldn't hold on and gave up the winner with 3 seconds left. Anger. Can you believe that cheap hit? He's lucky he didn't break the guy's neck. Sports, like novels and soap operas, allow men to identify and live vicariously through their team. They follow intensely emotional storylines involving heroes, villains, jokers, underdogs, overcoming obstacles, human frailties, perseverance, testing the limits of the human body and will. So the next time you think your partner doesn't express his emotions, just observe him while he's watching his favorite sports team play. But how does this help me if my partner still says, I don't know, when I ask him how he's feeling? Well, most people don't know how to ask effectively. Here's a tip. When he says, I don't know, this is what it usually means. He doesn't know. Don't assume the worst. For example, he's just trying to avoid talking about it. He's intentionally trying to make me mad. Okay, yes, he might also be trying to avoid talking about it, but he probably still doesn't know how he's feeling. In fact, this is partly why he may avoid talking, so he doesn't feel ignorant, embarrassed, or vulnerable. This is probably why guys don't ask for directions either. Many men who are attending therapy for the first time are afraid that the therapist will ask them, so, how are you feeling? And then sit and stare at them for an uncomfortably long time, waiting for a response. This is like someone asking us an impossibly hard astrophysics question, and then sitting and waiting, slowly shining the spotlight on our ignorance. Most of us would likely get defensive or try to avoid the question also. In general, it is true that women in our society are better educated in understanding and expressing a wider range of emotions. For example, it's more culturally acceptable for young girls to express sadness, fear, disappointment, or embarrassment. Often young boys are told, be a man, suck it up, don't be weak. So why are we surprised when those boys grow up to be emotionally uneducated men? Further, these men have not learned how to constructively express negative emotions in a way that don't leave them feeling vulnerable or open to criticism. For example, fear, embarrassment, or guilt. As a result, they may cover up these primary negative emotions with a secondary negative emotion such as anger, which in the short term leaves them feeling less vulnerable. So instead of acknowledging the underlying feeling and saying, I feel embarrassed and afraid, some guys might say, that situation ticked me off, leave me alone. As a general rule, emotions that are stuffed, repressed, or covered up have greater power over us. Admitting that we're afraid, embarrassed, or sad is usually the first step in reducing its effect on us. The good news is that it is not too late for someone to educate themselves in order to better understand and communicate how they're feeling, and that there are many constructive ways to deal with unpleasant feelings.
That was Dr. Martin Hinch. So, because we haven't been taught how to adequately express our emotions, they come out in unhealthy releases. Whether we are abusive to our women, whether we are setting a bad example for our kids, whether we don't know how to function at all away from and in the midst of certain environments, while there are other triggers that prompt us to respond or rather react to a certain stimuli. Many men would attribute something in their childhood that would be the cause of why now in their adulthood they're not able to function adequately. Or at least they're saying that this is how I was brought up, not to express any type of emotion. But again, as Dr. Martin said, that is not true. Because you see, when it comes to a sports game, all the emotions in the world are released. Men gather by the thousands to attend these sport games, and yet they can't gather in those numbers just to sit around and talk about their emotions. Yelling and screaming at the television is one thing, but learning how to vent in a healthy, controlled environment for some reason seems difficult to do. During the week, we're going to talk about what it means to be a man, what it means to be male, and certain of those definitions factor in why a man thinks that he has to operate in a certain type of way. We're going to debunk some of those things during the course of this week on this special series of Man Up. But if we were just diagnosing problems, looking at the symptoms, and not seeking to give an answer, then this exercise would definitely have been futile. And so let's begin with the way that we need to begin in giving out answers. Number one, parents definitely need to stop shaping their men with the mindset that you are a man, you don't cry. You are a man, you do this or you do that. That's one of the first things that needs to happen because, again, all these triggers begin from childhood, no doubt. And yes, while there is no manual, and when I say no manual, I mean a definitive one on how to be a parent, sure, you have books, but that's written from the author's perspective and not unique to your situation. So in your home, you may have been in a single parent home, and that single parent might well have been your mother. And the way that the mother-father dynamic is, that man might be hated. And so the mother takes out all her frustration and anger towards that child's father on the child. Every time she sees that child, she sees the father, and therefore she lashes out at him. Of course, as a child, his default emotion is to cry, and then she'll say, I'll give you something to cry about. And the cycle repeats and repeats. So we need to develop healthy boys who will become healthy men. Answer number two, early on, because, see, the thing is, we know certain problems begin in childhood, and we seek to nip it in the bud. Say, for instance, a health issue, a genetic birth defect. We know those are happening, and so therefore we try to bring a solution early on, whether in the womb or early on in childhood. We seek to repair, we seek to reverse. But we know that there is an epidemic when it comes to men not being able to relate to each other, not being able to sit in a room and discuss their emotions like our female counterparts do. That needs to change. That needs also in childhood to be fostered. We need to sit down with our boys and tell them it's okay to say this, it's okay to say that. You're feeling it, so verbalize it. It's not good to hold it in. It's not good to hold it in. And then finally, in adulthood, look back over the past and see where you have been hurt as a man in your childhood, in growing up. Certain things about you were stigmas, and they stuck with you. So the solution then, therefore, is, and it's a hard saying, but it's a needed one, we need to learn to let certain things go. We need to learn to get over certain things. We need to learn, well, let's leave it at that, we need to learn. But more importantly, we need to unlearn. And that's the takeaway. We need to unlearn negative traits, negative behaviors, negative attitudes. We need to unlearn certain things that were programmed into us from generations. My brothers, if we are ever going to develop into healthy men and examples to our families, we definitely need to not just swallow the pride, but digest it and excrete it. Sorry for the crass language, but it is needed. We need to realize that we cannot be the same old man like we were before. We can no longer blame our women for this, that, and the other. We cannot. We have to learn how to communicate our problems. We have to learn how coming together as men isn't just supposed to be over the sports team. We need to learn to commiserate with each other. We need to learn to release. And tied into that, of course, is that we need to learn how to be open. We need to learn how to be receptive. We need to learn how to be there for each other. We don't need terms like suck it up or you're a man and men don't do this and men don't do that. We have been emasculated for far too long. It is time that we take back up what it truly means to be a man as it was intended for us to be. There's hope. On our next podcast, we'll be looking at the topic mandate, what it means to be male. Join us then. Until then, this has been your host, the Word Master, and this has been Man Up, a presentation of the Union Media Group and RMG Productions.